Thank you very much. It's always lovely to get a clap before you've done anything. We walked in here tonight, and it's such a beautiful place to come to, this space. And so once we got over that, we then realised there was no seats, and that was a bit of a shock, because we'd sort of planned the fact that you might be all packed together as one tight unit. But to find this big space, we've just redone everything. So it might seem our presentation might be a bit rough around the edges, a little bit, because we've just changed it all. But that's creativity for you, isn't it, really? So are you all right with that? Yeah, we're all right with that. I'm looking around. A few people thinking, well, I'm not sure. When we say we're going to use the space, I don't want you to get worried about that. We're not into humiliating anyone. Other than ourselves. That's the title of the book. That's my new font I've got for my PowerPoint, which is Indiana Jones, which is quite like. I'll send that to you if you want it. And we're here to sort of share some ideas from our book tonight. The book is set around the idea of a map. And there are 10 places on the map, and we've taken each place and turned them into ideas for use in classrooms or in learning spaces. If you're working with young people, with children, it might be a book of interest. So hopefully, through the course of this session, we'll be able to share some ideas with you as well.
The book's had some cracking reviews. That was one. If you want to know what's wrong with English education, that's it there in a little nugget. Yeah. What we thought of when we started writing it was about the power of place and what would a curriculum look like if instead of it saying things like the Romans, the Victorians, volcanoes, space, if it said the forest, the cave, the island, and so on and so forth. So basically we sat down for a couple of weeks when we were unemployed, and we ate lots of nice lunches at the local pub and drank craft beers. And the product of all that beer is the book. And that will be abundantly clear to you when you read it. But this kind of makes a fairly serious point, I think, because in our education system at the minute, there is this belief that things are either or. That children either have to learn spelling or they become creative. And what we wanted to look at was, where does knowledge sit in a curriculum model that places at its heart creativity and places at its heart the firm belief that children have an entitlement to enjoy their education, radical as that might sound, and then how do we use that enjoyment as a vehicle to make them want to acquire the kinds of knowledge, to make them motivated to acquire the kinds of knowledge that we hope they'll achieve as they go through that process. And really, all we're going to do with you today, and this is a little bit on the hoof, because, you know, as we were planning this session, we were planning for you to be in a fixed position for the whole session. And then as soon as we walked into this space, we did that thing, you know, that as a teacher you do when the technology fails. You kind of pull out your plan B, and it ends up being better than your plan A. So we're hoping that's what's going to happen. So we're going to take you somewhere, and we're going to build something in this space. So one of the things we've kind of started with, and our starting point, we did some work in Orkney a couple of months ago, and this was really what we were working on with the teachers up there, is this idea of what does creativity mean, and does it sit in opposition to some of the things that perhaps more traditional perspectives on education are trying to promote. And there was a key question there that the head teachers in Orkney came up with, not us, and it was this. It's how do we make the unfamiliar for children feel important? When we talk about relevance, too often we think that relevance has to be about their existing life experience. So we'll do things like choose a book that is like their life. Does that make sense? So I know a book that's set on an estate that's like the one that the children live on. Or I know we could do a topic around football and their favourite team. Or I know we could do a topic around Pokemon, because they all like Pokemon. And we start to think relevance is really about tailoring the curriculum to the child's experience, whereas I think it's about making the curriculum that is unfamiliar relevant to the child. Does that make sense? And finding that connection where they really hook in. And that's pretty much where we're starting with our work. And this comes from your own, Scottish curriculum, that impact report on creativity across learning. And I think we can't say it any better than this, but it's about taking the learner to genuinely new places. And we've taken that very literally. So our new places are forests and caves and theme parks and islands and so on and so forth. But that's where we're hoping to take you tonight. So we are literally going to get you up and doing. And I'm going to hand over to Hywel.
So, I know you've all just got settled probably, but what we've got are some resources just on these tables here. There's sheets of paper and there's pens. I wondered if just in the next sort of 30 seconds to a minute or so, if you can all find yourself with a piece of paper and a pen. You know, if you brought a better pen than the one we're offering you, just use that. If you're a primary colleague, you've got a really nice set of felt tips in your bag, which you never leave your side. Get them as well. If you've just been shoplifting down Smith's, use one of those. And you can return to your seats if you want, or you can just sort of creatively mingle. This is going to be a bit of, I'm just going to describe something and I just want you to draw it. But don't worry if you're no good at art. But if you can try and stick to the instructions that I'm giving you, that'd be great. All right. So, your sheet, can we have it landscape, please? And can you draw a line sort of in the middle from left to right, but not a straight line, not a curvy line, more of a jagged, wonky line. But that's all I'm going to give you. I'm going to come around and have a look. There's almost too much creativity in here. You want to get yourself down the shops and get a clip frame for that one. Right, so you've done that. Thanks for doing that. Now, what I want you to add are those. Just above the line. Above the line, I'd like you to do those little ticks.
Bosoms.
But who said that? Did I think that, or did... No. Yeah, those, just those up there. If you want to draw a few of them, those. And you may be thinking now, we're doing mountains. That's what we're doing. Those are the birds in the sky. We could do that. We could be creating a context, a mountain context, where that's the sky, and we're going to add the snow caps to those jagged hills. But we're not. We're going to label it up, the sea and the land. So can you literally copy that, the sea and the land? Is that all right? If you just label it up. So I'm sure you can see what we're doing. We're making a map. Bird's eye view. Now, just with the person next to you, if I was to suggest to you, this map you have in front of you is of an island where no one has lived for a long time. If we were just to think about the geographical features of this island, what geographical features might we find on such a place? Could you just have a chat with the person next to you? If you sat between two people, just pick your favourite. Very good, well done. Hey, listen, I didn't know we had that much geography knowledge in the room. I heard someone say glaciation. I heard someone say hills. Now, I've got a list to help just here. I've just got a list there. Now, this is the fun bit, if you like. And we're just going through the motions here. This is the fun bit. What I want you to do, I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes to turn your quite dull map at the moment, because it's just labelled the land and the sea. There's a few waves on there. I want you to turn it into something that might resemble that. You don't have to copy mine, but you could take those examples. I want you to add to your map lakes, swamps. Hey, if you want a volcano on there, you fill your boots. Just add details to your map. I know mine is quite overwhelmingly brilliant up there. One tree represents a huge forest. Let's say that. So, do you want to just have a couple of minutes? It's gone really quiet. You can chat among your friends now and just say, hey, have you seen mine? Look what I'm adding. But remember, this is just the geographical features. I've actually seen someone look quite forlorn because they feel they've done it wrong. They've done it wrong. You haven't done it wrong. It just doesn't look like a mountain. Colleagues, if you can stand up now with your sheet. Stand up with your sheet. This is the fun bit. Stand up with your sheet. This is when Debra and I, we step back and we just see what's going to happen. I'm going to do my best now to describe what I need to happen in the next 2 minutes. Now, I might not do it brilliantly, but rest assured I've just tried my best. We have this space around here where there are no seats. We've got this space. What we're going to do, Debra's going to model this, is we're going to take our map and you're going to bring it and you're going to join your bit of coastline to an existing piece of coastline, and we're going to join all our coastlines together, so eventually we should have, in the middle of this room, around here, an island. So when you've placed yours down, I don't really want you to go all the way back to your seat. I'd like you to sort of stay knocking around the island, stay knocking around the perimeter. Is that all right? Or around the coastline. Off you go. We're going to have one big island, so let's see where it's all going. It's looking good.
Think about how big it needs to be. Look at how many people are in the room and how many pieces of paper have to be added to this one. And you might want to make it much, much bigger than you've started. If you need to take it back to make it bigger to fit everyone's in, then move it back. Think about how it all joins. Remember, the sea's on the outside. You don't have a sea on the inside of an island. It was easier with you.
Just going to need to make the island bigger around some of it. Big in it, this island. Big island. Could we join it up? Is that all right? Oh, sorry. I mean, if you want to. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Right. Hey, look at that. That only took a quarter of an hour. We'll debrief all this later, but you may picture doing this with some children and what the purpose is and so on. Let's say there's a timeline from over here. Starts there.
We'll put it in the middle here. So
well, oh, you bring it through here. Okay.
Yeah. So we know that the earliest signs of life on this island were about 40,000 BC. And we have evidence for this in the caves that are on the island. And we also know that the last known people who lived here around 1700 AD. But we have no idea why the people left or what happened to them. So can you just turn to the person standing next to you and think, where is the curriculum in this? Off you go.
just going to click it on there.
That's the cave of sanctuary and the mound of the dead. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, we're going to get them to name them. We're just going to get them to write later.
Well, we'll tell them those, and then we'll ask them to, in groups of 2 or 3, to think of the other names for other places that would mark an event. You know what we could do there? Then we could get them into groups of 4 to go and find a space in the room to create a statue that marks an event.
Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah.
Okay, that curriculum question is just that. It's just that careful thing that we have to do to make sure that what we're doing has value. Otherwise we're just getting people to draw. And that's the same as making posters. So we've got to make sure it's got value. Now maybe if you've just been talking about the curriculum possibility, you've done a bit of Imagineering there and you've thought of some stuff that perhaps you could do. But we'll just go back to this. I just want to highlight this to you. Down here we have, there's a place. It's the Cave of Sanctuary. All those years ago, this was an important place, I imagine, for the people who inhabited the island. And up here, you don't have to come with me, but I'm just doing that. Follow me up here. Here, we have a place that was known as the Mound of the Dead. I know, it's quite a cheery place. The Mound of the Dead, I wonder why that was significant. It had a name. We may come back to that. Now, in between, we've got this timeline. What we'd like you to do, I'd like you to go in the spirit of this, in the best way we can, in the time we've got. If we lived here on this island, on this timeline, we'll have named places. We'll have named the forest. You've labelled up a mountain, you've labelled up the swamp, you've labelled up a forest. But all of these places will have had names. They will have been given names. For example, the Forest of Silence. Yeah, one little girl named a mountain Widow's Push. And I said, well, why? And I was like, why is it called that? And she said, she married him, took him up there and pushed him off. Which was a reason. And then they made a statue of the event. So there was that boy that no one wanted to work with, and they were pushing him off, these 3 girls. Now, what we'd like you to do is think of a place. You've already got the places, but let's give them a significant human historical edge by giving them a name. We have, for example, like I said, the Cave of Sanctuary and the Mound of the Dead. What could you name in your group? So we'd like you to get into groups, maybe of 3 or 4. Get this, right? Just go for it. All right. We want you to name a place, and we'd like you to make the statue that honors that place name. All right? And if you want, and for the more able amongst you, what we'd like you to do, perhaps, is present the inscription at the base of the statue. So it might just be the name and why it got its name. Does that make sense? Yeah, no, a bit more enthusiasm. Does that make sense? Yes. You've got lots of space. Let's use it. Go and use the space. Make a friend. Make a friend. Groups of about 3 or 4. Let's see some statues. Not going to give you long.
30 seconds.
30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Oh, you're harsh.
$20 seconds.
It'd be really lovely to see some statues.
Are we ready? 10.
10,
9,
9,
8,
8,
7,
7, 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3,
3,
2,
1.
1, and freeze.
Oh, I tell you what, I'm just drawn over here to... Oh, do you remember that time in our history when we just had a brew? It's just over here, look. That statue of us just having a cup of tea. Right, I'm looking around. We're looking around for silence. Shh. I'm going to come to you. Going to come along to you. I'm just walking over here to the professionals. Shh. Shh. You got something to say?
Our inscription is, beware what lies beyond.
Right, I think we need more reaction than that. So I'm going to ask our colleague here to do that again. Have a look at this one here. All right, I'm going to ask our colleague to just do that again.
Beware what lies beyond.
We don't have one. Peril enter on your own cognizance.
I don't even know what that means.
That's just how she welcomes people in a school.
That's an ancient language. That is. There's one having a moment here.
I can't. I don't know what to say. No.
The swamp of seldom return.
Oh, the swamp, the swamp, the swamp. I'm here.
Beware the black mark.
Beware the black mark.
You can relax now.
Yeah. It's stressing me right out. That. Give yourselves a clap. Give yourselves a clap then.
Okay, first things first. How often do we expect kids to just do things that when we're asked to do them ourselves, we get into a little bit of a state about? Do you know what I mean? And yet, we could have given you 5 minutes. We gave you 30 seconds. As soon as we said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that's when you did the work. Does that make sense? So this is about just crystallizing an idea quickly that you can build from. And it doesn't need to take ages because actually kids will take as long as you give them, whether that's 30 seconds or 5 minutes. But what you started to generate in the moment was spontaneity. When we thrust those microphones in front of your faces, some of you didn't know what you were going to say. Does that make sense? But as soon as you've committed to it, you've got a story. And it's about getting children to commit to a moment that they're going to invest in. And from that moment of investment, you can take it where you want it to go. Does that make sense? I think we've probably, if it tortured you as much as we're going to today. Yeah. So this is a chance where you get to grab a chair and just pull it close and then sit down.
Bring a chair onto the island. A deck chair.
Yeah. You can bring it onto the island, don't worry.
You can come forward if you want. It's not real.
We can skip that.
And then it's that, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's that. Get yourselves comfy.
Careful, we've had to pay a deposit.
Try not to break the china. So, power of place. This is This is what you're doing to get children invested in something, because as soon as they've drawn it, labelled it, stepped into it, and identified a moment in time where something happened, they're in it. And whether you want to use that to pursue volcanoes or oxbow lake formations or canyoning and caving or archaeology, whatever you want to go into, you've built that first starting point where suddenly it's relevant to them. Does that make sense? You've made this place relevant to them. It's a distant, unfamiliar place. You could have made it a real island. We did it with the Orkneys in Japan because they've got a partnership going on. Whatever you want to do with it, your first step is always to get the children to see their connection to the material. And that's all we were doing there. This is just another thing that we've been doing with smaller groups, obviously, because look at the size of their island compared to yours. But we were laying the bodies to rest. This is what we're doing here, and we're doing it quite ceremoniously. And we're looking at the people who lived here, and if we dug beneath the ground, what we would find and the clues that archaeologists look for. And last week, I was doing this with a group of kids in Singapore, and their vision of an island was very different to the vision of the island that we had in the Orkneys. But where they went with it was to a UN summit, because what they found on their island were precious things, gemstones, precious metals. They even found a quality to the water that healed wounds when you put your hand into it. And they said, who should own this? And what they did was they set up a UN committee to look at land ownership and the ownership of materials that are for universal human benefit. And they set up a conference, if you like, to look at what kinds of conventions might the UN invent in order to protect future territories that man might discover here on Earth and also in space. Does that make sense? And that's what we started with the island. Hywel's going to share with you one of his stories, but really what we're looking at in this is what are the potentials in any place for the curriculum to take you into a different direction.
I'll do this really quickly because of time, but the children here they're in Grimsby, just on the east coast, and they did this, and we were thinking about if this is where we live. We decided this is where we live. Let's say we live here. That's my suggestion, and I nod my head, and I find that primary age children nod back. We live here. So we decided on building a culture. So we thought about, okay, if we live here, what are our jobs? If we live here, what are our laws? And what do we do with people who break them? And they suggested we hang them from trees as a warning to others. So we made a fascist community. No, well, the thing I wanted to get to was school curriculum. I just said to the children, if we have a school, what do we learn in it? And this boy called Mac, who was quite a troubled little boy, the head had already said, do you want me to take him out? Which I thought was a bit over the top. But he wanted to take him out before we'd even started, really. And I said, well, no, it's all right. He hadn't done anything. But Mac put up his hand. When I said, what do we learn in our schools? He said, Bear Grylls. And I knew exactly what he meant. So do you. So I said, okay, Bear Grylls. What does that mean? What is the Bear Grylls curriculum? And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, fishing. I said, okay. We are in Grimsby. So I said, okay. Yeah. How do we make fish hooks? I asked. And he thought about it only for a moment, and he said, we make them from the claws of lions. Do you want me to show you? And the head's at the back going, but I'm yes. So I just said, yeah. So we got up, and I can only describe it as a piece of dramatic movement with no music. He just moved around, clearly demonstrating the capture and strangulation of a ferocious lion and the ripping out of a claw and holding it aloft. And when he held it aloft, he fell to his knees, and all the rest of the kids just applauded and whooped him. It was brilliant. I wanted to just pack it in then, that's enough, we've done enough. And he said to me, that's how we make fish hooks. And I was like, great. we did other things as well. And these are some questions we asked. Not all of those came from those kids. This is me thinking about it afterwards and working with older students as well. It was all about making a history of the island, making this sense of being part of a place. We did some occupational mime, show me the jobs that need doing, and the kids were just acting out what they were doing. And then the mountain ranger turned up. I'll speak as the mountain ranger. I'll talk as the mountain ranger. I've been up there a long time, and I've had to come back early because I have found a footprint, and I do not know who the footprint belongs to. So we really need to think about this. And all the kids, this is before playtime, and all the kids are like, who is it? Who does it belong to? Well, that was the footprint. And you can almost start writing this little lesson itself, probably. But the footprint, and seeing that footprint, some of the children recognized it for what it was, a picture of a Yeti's footprint. And what it actually is it's all those things. As soon as they see the footprint, suddenly the meaning behind this community comes to fruition. It's like, right, we are this community, and now we've got something to do. We need to go and see who owns that foot that has made that print. We left messages for our loved ones because we were going to go on this expedition into the mountain. We were going to go away from the coast and go and see if we could find who owned the footprint and so on. Then we did. Can you see us here? We're carrying our lanterns. Look how shocked we were. Look at our shock. And we're moving towards what we see in the distance, in the corner of the hall. We see that peeping out from behind the tree. Now, Mac, who had done his little performance earlier, as soon as he'd seen the footprint, he was miming having a gun. And all he wanted to do was kill it. Whatever it was, he wanted to kill it and wear its skin. That's all he wanted to do. And he was walking around with this gun. And I was doing that nice teachery thing, but I was struggling. I was doing that, do you really need to have a gun? And he was like, yes. And I was like, maybe you're just going to knock it out with a special tranquilizer dart? No, I'm just going to kill it. It's like, all right, okay. Now, when he saw this, when Max saw this, backed up with a message written in ice. How do you do that in a classroom? You do it on a piece of A4 paper and write it. And say that let's say this is a message in the ice. It said, help us. And because Max saw that, and he added it up that the creature had written that, and he'd figured out, well, that must mean it speaks English. He changed his position. He got rid of his gun, and that's a photograph of Mac there. Can you see him? That's him there. And he changed his gun to this. Now I'm there. I've got my lantern and everything. I'm way back there. He's changed his whole demeanor and his whole appearance because he's sensed a vulnerability in that creature, I think. And when the teacher asked him, "What have you got in your hands there, Mac?" He just said, I've got it a present. Because he'd shifted. He'd gone from sort of wanting to kill it to having some form of compassion. Does that make sense? I've whizzed through that quickly. And that was where we finished. The nasty, bad people were taking away the Yeti, who were peaceful, loving creatures who shared our island. We just didn't know they were there. And we felt duty-bound then to look after them. How do you look after something that you don't know anything about? And so that was where we left it, really. Now, with the teachers afterwards, because there was teachers working with me that day, they could see where it could go. I could engineer that up, and really, it's not dislocated from reality. Just because we're talking about Yetis, it's not dislocated. It's not separate from the world, is it? And maybe with older students, we could go into conservation and so on. But it all started with drawing a coastline.
So we've been thinking a little bit about these places and how you can take the same thing, the same idea, the same difficulty and problem, and deliver it to different age groups. So last week, I taught the same lesson to 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and 11-year-olds. Just the same thing. But we just slightly altered it so that this was the starting point for the younger ones, and this was the starting point for the middle-aged ones, and this was the starting point for the older ones. And you see, it's the same problem, but you're making that problem more age-appropriate as they get older, so that the reality is hitting them in the same way. But just as we've done with the island this afternoon, all we've done here is create a place, and that piece of masking tape on the floor, it marks the boundary between the land and what was the ice and now is just the sea. And the children have been looking at seals, and we went through a few images of the seals, and we looked at the polar bear. And what we looked at was this idea of a polar bear who is in distress, whose habitat has disappeared, whose food supply has disappeared. And the children have 3 options. They can either decide to move him inland, but the problem with moving him further inland and further north is that his food source is even rarer. They can move him closer to a human population, or they can move him somewhere else altogether. So can you just turn to the person sitting next to you and think, what are the pros and cons, just as all these children did, what are the pros and cons of each one of those options? Like, you're proper grown-ups, but I imagine you've come up with exactly the same problems that the children did. If we move him inland, he's going to starve. And if we are going to commit to looking after him, we're going to have to take the food to him. So that's going to create a whole logistical difficulty for us. If we move him closer to a human population, we put the human population in peril. And if we take him somewhere else, then we have to think about who is taking him in and where he's going and what kinds of difficulties that's going to create for the people who take him in. So the children thought about this. This was the townspeople's perspective from year 3. They're not too happy at the prospect. And they tell the polar bear quite clearly why he poses a danger to them and why they're not going to let him in. The seals are not too happy about relocating him to an island where they are very happily living without the presence of polar bears. The bears themselves are starting to consider where they might go and why they might go, and ultimately the children decide to send him to a zoo. So then we have the problem of how do you look after a polar bear in the zoo? Now, these children are in Singapore, and I don't know if any of you have ever been to Singapore Zoo, but there is a polar bear in Singapore Zoo. And it's one of the most outstanding zoos in the world, this zoo. I mean, for the orangutans, they've got fantastic enclosures, and lots of the animals have just got amazing spaces. But the polar bears is depressing. It's a fiberglass mock iceberg and a warm pond, and that polar bear just looks thoroughly depressed the whole time. So these children are designing their own enclosure for the polar bear and trying to think about how they could make his life a bit more bearable. And these are the solutions they're coming up with. They suggest, first of all, he swims and he follows the current. So then we have to look at, where do the ocean's currents go? And if a polar bear just went with the flow, where would he end up? If we put him in a boat, how do you actually transport an animal, especially a dangerous animal, and what would we have to pack with him? So these are all the things where children's solutions open up another area of the curriculum. Does that make sense? And you're following the curriculum in response to their solutions. When they arrived at the zoo and they've designed the enclosure, they encounter all kinds of difficulties, because all I have to write on a scrap of paper is today's temperature is 30 degrees Celsius and a picture of a sunshine, and the children are suddenly going, it's too hot for him, what are we going to do? And then we've got a beautiful difficulty, because the first response from all of them, the 5-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, and the 11-year-olds, was air conditioning. In fact, they were going to have the best air conditioning ever because it was going to create ice. And they were going to make an ice world for him. And it was fantastic. And then I said to them, how much energy does it take for us to create this ice world for the polar bear? And they're like, oh, a lot. They didn't know how much. They're not A-level physics students or higher physics students. But they knew it was a lot of energy. It's going to cost us a lot, and it's going to take a lot of energy to make this place. And then we only have to ask that little question of why did he have to come here in the first place? And they see that dilemma. Does that make sense? And it's about putting children into situations where there are no easy or straightforward answers. What I was going to show you was, because what they then went on to do was to look at writing a statement from the animals in the zoo called Dear Human Beings. And their Dear Human Being statements came from the perspective of orangutans, polar bears, panda bears. They could choose any animal they wanted. I'm not sure whether the sound works on these, but I might just try and put the microphone close to this one and see if we can play it. Just bear with me one moment, see if it works. No, it's not going to work. That is it. There's no sound at all on that. It doesn't matter. But she's effectively telling me, as the cameraman filming their statement, that the man's desire for palm oil and the palm oil products that we eat in our foods have led to those orangutans being in the zoo. Does that make sense? But the 6-year-old, who's also speaking, makes the same point. And what I want us to start thinking about is that children of all kinds of ages have similar kinds of knowledge, and you can put them in the same context, and what you're doing is you're engineering that knowledge up to an age-appropriate point. Does that make sense? But what you're not doing is engineering your learning down to what you think is an age-appropriate point that might actually be limiting their learning. Is that making sense? It's kind of like differentiation. I always think differentiation is at its very worst when we give some kids this task and some kids this task and some kids this task. Because how are those ever going to know what it's like to try this task if we don't allow them access? Whereas if everybody gets this and you think about catching them as they fall and scaffolding that, then you're onto a winner, really. So, can you? We're going to take you through just a little bit of another zoo example. Can you just have a look at this chap? It might be a chapess. I don't know. I don't know how you sex pandas. It's not my area of expertise, but I've assumed it's a chap. And can you, on your chairs, adopt his position? So you sit as you think he is. I went to this creative conversation in Edinburgh and I felt right stupid. He asked me to be a panda. And what we get the children to do at this point is to think of a word to describe him. Some of them say chilled and relaxed. Some of them say bored. Some of them say frustrated. They come up with a whole range of views. But I'd now like you to, and I'm going to count you down from 10 to 0 here. I want you to shift that position and think of, if I'm the panda and I'm looking at you, what do I see? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Do I see loads of people sitting on chairs staring at me? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All day long, they stare, they point, they click, click, click. Some of them don't even look at me. Some of them turn around, and all I see is the backs of their heads. Now, how is he feeling? Just turn to the person sitting next to you and think, how is that panda feeling? What's in there? What's in there? And what you can get the children to do is to design the space that is through that door. And how much time does he spend in there, and what does it look like? And when we look at this, what's in there, they often say water. But where would he have got his water from before? What was life like for him before? And this is a real picture from Beijing Zoo. And you can see how we're layering this up now. So that once they've designed the enclosure, once they've decided where he's getting his water from, we start to look at the other dangers and the other possibilities of harm that this panda's facing. From people throwing rubbish into the enclosure to the paint that's peeling off the walls. And what we're doing is we're deliberately tricking the children into a position of anger. Does that make sense? Because who do they want to talk to? They want to talk to that zookeeper, and they want to sort that zookeeper out, and they want to make sure that that zookeeper is looking after this panda properly, because this is a disgrace. I've had one little boy saying, before I even opened my mouth as the zookeeper, "This is a disgrace! And how can you possibly be doing this to the panda?" So I want to flip it then, because there's no point in taking children down one pathway where the world is good or bad or black or white or, and everything's sort of easy to decide. What you want to do is put them into positions of difficulty. So when the zookeeper starts talking about the reality of life for the pandas, the shrinking habitats they face, the fact that this is where he would like his panda to be living, but the reality is he was found here. And that panda would have starved to death if he hadn't rescued him. Does that make sense? Suddenly they're like, oh, and then what's our solution? Then what's our possibility? Then what can we do? Because the children live in these places that have been built on the panda's habitat. Does that make sense? It's us, not the zookeeper, that has created this situation. And so now we're complicit. And it's bringing children into that place where they become complicit and also responsible. They're both. Does that make sense? That we can start to move them to a position where we can really do something about it. And we can't really do something about it because this panda doesn't exist. I've just got the pictures off Google. But what we can do is take them into a position where they're moving from empathy for the panda into active compassion, where they want to change the world and do something differently. So the children ask, what can we do? Who can we ask for help? What's in our way? What are the barriers? What are the difficulties that we might face if we want to do something about this situation? And they come up with a number of possibilities. One of them is redesigning the zoo. One of them is setting up an inspectorate that checks the quality of zoos. Another one is raising money for organisations, animal welfare organisations. And another one is really thinking about their own habits on a day-to-day basis, about single-use plastics, for example, switching the lights off. And they come up with an action plan of 10 things I can do as a 7-year-old, as an 11-year-old, that can make the planet a better place and think about where we are for animals, so that we can end up with, they like that one. They like that one a lot. We can end up with happier animals on the planet. We're not depressing the hell out of them. We want to be solution-focused, but we want to be solution-focused in a way that places them knee-deep in dilemma, so they're having to wade through difficulty and think really hard, and things aren't just always easy and straightforward for them. And this is just a picture from the book, really, because a lot of the things that we talk about there in terms of zoo come from this image of the snow leopard who has clawed away at the image that reminds him of his homeland. And where might we go with that?
Have a moment with that picture. Each chapter of the book starts with an image, and that's a powerful one. If you've got a question for that picture, I wonder what it is. Do you want to just tell the person next to you, what question have you got for that picture? Tell the person next to you. And that questioning, the questioning there, that's, we call that a bit of just imagineering. These are the questions that children might ask as well. Your children might ask these questions. And that a picture such as that is, as Deborah says, we can engineer that up to use with older students. We can engineer it down and use it with younger students. I know that, if you've seen our work before, and I know we've worked with many of you here, this is something that we've shown you before, but I wanted to show it you again because we've moved it on a little bit. This is, it's from the work of Dorothy Heathcote, who is just a great teacher who we both had the privilege of working with when we were reorganising, or a curriculum was being reorganised, actually at my secondary school in Barnsley, which is where I met Deborah. And Dorothy Heathcote came to work with us to support us in our reorganisation of an innovative curriculum. A curriculum worth behaving for, frankly. That's what we were aiming for. And what Dorothy used to say was, she spoke this in a meeting, and I just wrote it down. But most kids will give us their attention, and then we kick in as teachers, and we get past the manners and politeness, and we get to gathering interest for a topic or a theme or a subject matter. And then we get the kids engaged. And we could stop there, and engagement could be the ceiling, and actually the kids are just doing. And I'm sure many of us have worked with children who will just queue up and get the next task from us, and then they'll finish that, and then they'll come back and get the next task, and so on, and they will just do as they are asked. But are they challenged? And that's the bit we're not sure about, and certainly Dorothy wasn't sure about that. So she added some extra layers to this idea. If we place the children into the area of concern, as Deborah has described just now, if we place the kids in an area of, I call it botheredness. If we get them bothered about an aspect of a topic or a theme or whatever it is we're doing, if we get them concerned, then actually they will then invest. So their position will shift, if you like, from one of being an engaged, compliant learner to a kid who actually needs to do something with their knowledge. They've got the knowledge from you, and they're very grateful, but now they need to do something with it. And that's that investment, and that takes us up to obsession. And obsession isn't a weird thing. It's not hanging around in your garden looking in. It's obsession is where a kid will say to you, please, can we do it again? Can I take it home and show my mummy? That kind of thing, you know? Do we have to do that? Can we just carry on doing this? Can I stay in at lunch and stuff like that? That's where obsession sits. And we've added those words in yellow. I think if we just stop there, if you like, we stop there, we're just reinforcing that idea that children need to be dependent. If we move beyond that, we're inviting children to be independent. And I told that story of Mac, a clumsy story of Mac in a way there, but that is a boy who's thinking for himself, and he is absolutely invested and bothered about what's happening. And he's not that bothered about a right lot, to be fair. You'll notice, you'll see where story sits, where narrative sits. Sometimes I know that when we talk about using stories in classrooms, people go, oh, it's drama, right, it's drama, so it's over there. It's drama, so it's over there, because actually drama means a bit of chaos in the classroom. And there was an interesting point made earlier when we didn't give you a lot of time to put together your statues that we would find hidden in the undergrowth of the island. We didn't give you a lot of time, because sometimes we give kids too long, especially when we're doing drama, and what happens is we do get chaos. I remember doing the Pied Piper of Hamelin once, and it ended up being relocated to a drugs bust in LA. Do you know what I mean? It's like you give kids too much time, and they just start inventing. Oh, like we don't want them. We want them to, but we want them to invent within the parameters we're setting down. Stories, kids will remember them. We remember stories. According to cognitive scientist Daniel Willingham, stories are psychologically privileged. We store them well. So actually what we can do is, if we're placing children into the story, if we're standing with children in a story. So what I'm not doing is going to TES Connect or to some resource site on the internet and downloading some sort of template for an island. I'm not doing that. We're going to get the kids to make the island. We're going to get the kids to name the places. They're going to name the panda and so on. Then they are inside it, and it's that shift of position again to investment.